discuss the characteristics of individuals with disabilities in which you serve?
Mm-hmm. So with speech therapy, there is a huge range of students. There really is no specified, you know, eligibility necessarily. So we might work with students who have ADHD. We might work with students who are students with autism or Down syndrome, or we would classify someone who might be OHI, which stands for other health impairment. So that would be kind of ADHD, or maybe they have like a hearing impairment or things like that. There's a huge range of students that we might work with. But there also could be students who maybe even, like, as an example, someone who might have autism, they might be a savant. So they might have really specific skills that are very advanced, I guess I could say. So, but then they might need help with maybe their social language, something like that. So
thank you so much for, you serve a lot of different types of students. When we were in class, we looked over a sample IEP, and in this person's IEP, it was a developmental delay and they had some articulation goals.
yeah.
Can you talk about the difference between students you would work with that would have a speech impairment with articulation, and how they would be different from a student who was working on language skills?
Yeah, definitely. So sometimes they can coincide. Sometimes I might have a student who might have a language goal, and they might also have a speech goal or an articulation goal. But articulation is mainly just the sounds. So if they have a certain sound or many sounds that they misarticulate and they cannot produce, then they might only have those goals. And they might be a speech only student. So that might be their only eligibility, is articulation. Whereas the language portion could be many different things. It could be that they have struggles with maybe their syntax, or word order, or even like vocabulary. They might not know certain concepts as well. There's certain students I've worked with that they don't understand the days of the week or months of the year, seasons. Those are different language concepts, and so I would work with them on that. Or even just social language, that's a huge one. And so working with students on how to appropriately communicate with maybe their friends or a teacher, learning how to greet others, or maybe politely refuse a situation or something like that. Does that help?
Yes, that's very helpful. So you work with students from that sound level, from articulating like an L or an R sound in a word, all the way to sentences, all the way to concept level. So it's really all types of communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Also, can you describe the services that are available to students at the schools that you worked at?
Mm-hmm. So at both locations that I've worked at, they've provided occupational therapy, they've provided physical therapy, speech therapy. There's also counseling, sometimes counseling services, or just the SPED department team. And let me see, what else did I write down if I missed anything. Oh, there's also hearing specialists as well.
Oh, yeah.
Or even behavior coaches that might come in and help specifically with a student. So those are some.
It takes a whole team.
Yeah. Can I turn the light on really quick?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, hold on.
Oh, that looks better. That looks good.
So now that's blurry. Okay.
Perfect. Now, can you describe the steps in the IEP process?
Mm-hmm. As much as I'm aware, because I was an SLPA, or I am an SLPA. I wasn't as involved as an SLP, but I do still know the process. So first, the team might suggest a student that might need services based off of what's going on in the classroom, or a teacher, or I mean, excuse me, a parent might request that their child gets tested. If a parent requests that their child might need services, it has to be in writing as well. So it can't just be a verbal request. So then after that occurs, then the team will be collecting data, and they'll meet together for an MET1 or a MET1 meeting, and just to talk about what kind of testing is going to be needed, what kind of things they're wanting to look at and rule out for that child. And then after that, the team kind of disperses, and they do all their testing. So a psychologist might do cognitive testing, speech therapy, they might do testing. For speech, it could be a full-blown speech and language evaluation. So they might need to test all areas. So they might need to test, does the student need articulation? Does the student have language deficiencies? Whatever it might be. And so they'll do testing based off of what the team has decided. And then after everybody has, and I think there's 60 days that they get to do all of that. And then they'll meet again for a MET2 meeting, or some people just call it MET meeting. And they'll go over all the results. And so that will determine if the student is eligible for services or not. And then sometimes they might meet at a different time to go over the IEP, the actual individual education plan, or they might do it at the same time, just depends on timing, and to determine what goals, if the student does need services, then what are the goals that they're going to be working on for that IEP year. Yeah, and then it's implemented, or accommodations that might be needed for that student as well.
It sounds like the process to me. Yep, that covers everything that I remember doing when we went through all those steps from referral all the way to IEP. Let's see. Describe how special education teachers and related service supports and related staff, like a speech teacher and general ed teachers, work together to support each other with a student who has special needs.
Yeah, that's really important. And because sometimes the speech therapy might be outside of the classroom. So sometimes there, you do push in and you have services within the classroom, but sometimes they're pulled out into like a small group or one-on-one. And so if whatever we're working on in speech, if we can incorporate what they're learning within the classroom, that's so important, because then they're just getting extra support with whatever they're learning in class. So in order to do that, we have to collaborate and communicate with the staff and with the teachers, and even with the SPED staff as well, to know, what they're doing within their services, because we might be able to work together, depending on what their goals might be. I know that we had some students had similar goals when we worked together, main idea goals. And so even though they might be a little bit different, maybe the focal points might be different within the goals, they're still similar. And so we can back each other up. But in order to do that, we have to figure out how you are teaching it so we can do it together and not counterintuitive.
Yeah, you and I collaborated a lot. If we had some of those, if I was working on reading and you were working on articulation, then we could use similar materials to teach the same thing, to reinforce what they're learning. Can you, and I want you to finish what you were saying, Mrs. Gonzalez, but I just want to say, I noticed that you in our class used poetry to work on articulation. Can you tell us what that looked like?
Yeah, so we would kind of go through, because it was poetry that was assigned from the classroom. And so we would read through it, and we would also determine, especially if there were articulation goals, and pick out what words that might have the sound that student is working on. So we can pull those words out and really practice them, because those students had to recite the poem in front of the whole class. So if they have articulation issues, that could be really nerve-wracking for them to have to say it in front of the whole class, and they have issues with their articulation. So being able to give them and boost the confidence that they have and support them in that is so important. And then there's also different concepts that could be addressed within poetry. So if a student was working on non-literal language, maybe it's metaphors or similes or things like that, then we could pull that out of poetry as well. We could pull that and talk about and be able to help them better understand what the poetry is going to be all about. So then they can go back to their class and be confident to maybe ask questions or answer questions that the teacher might ask them. So just based off of poetry that was assigned in their literature class, we were able to do a lot with it. So
That makes sense to me. I didn't realize you were doing so many other concepts beyond the articulation. I bet
yeah.
they felt so much more confident working on it in a small group with you. Can you share, Mrs. Gonzalez, how did you collaborate with teachers to get these poetry assignments? Did you typically go into the class and talk to the teachers face to face? Did you have designated meeting times, or did you email?
A lot of times I would communicate over the phone with the teacher. So maybe
Oh, okay.
day, or I would go into the classroom like at the start of the day and just ask them what their poems might be. But then we also kind of got into a routine where the students were responsible and they brought it with them,
Oh,
because they knew, okay, we finished this poem, so I'm going to bring in this new one. That, and usually they had like a poetry folder and they would just bring it down with them, and they were responsible to bring it down.
so they knew the routines within your speech room of what you'd want to them to have, and they, as the older they got and the more used to your speech routines they got, they were able to anticipate what they should bring.
Yeah, and I think too, it was beneficial for them because it wasn't just an arbitrary assignment or just arbitrary words that I pulled. It was something that that they could take back with them, and it was, they could use it. It wasn't just a random assignment.
Passage.
Wanted
Yeah.
to,
This was something they were being graded on in their class, and they found it really valuable time well spent to be able to go over it with someone so that they were successful.
yeah,
That
exactly.
makes sense to me. I think there is, let's see, one or two more questions. When it comes to behavioral issues, um, students that you were working with, just I guess it probably is a two-part question, because addressing one, what happens if you're having if a student is showing some behavioral issues in your small group? And then also, how did you work on behavioral issues with those students so that it would streamline into their larger classroom? And I know one thing I hope you talk about is, I loved you always printed off for me to use with my students, those voice levels, and then expected and unexpected behavior. So feel free to use that in your examples, because you supplied me with a lot of resources that I used with my students.
Oh, good. Well, yeah. So, when I heard this question was going to be asked, I was so excited because behavior is so important. And one thing that I have learned is that behavior in and of itself is a communication. So all of us behave certain ways and we're communicating something. I mean, if somebody's yawning, they're communicating that they're tired. Or if someone might be, sorry, there's
That's
motorcycle.
okay.
But if somebody is clicking their pen constantly, they might be kind of anxious or something. Or if a student is getting up out of class or out of their seat frequently, maybe the assignment's really hard. And so we can evaluate that based off of their behavior. Maybe they're communicating that they can't do this task. maybe they're having outbursts in class because it's really challenging for them. That could be something. So you can evaluate what is going on with that student. And then also just positive reinforcement is so important. So obviously, I mean, it's really easy to tell a student what they're not supposed to be doing, but it's another thing to be able to encourage and tell them what your expectation is of them. So if they're constantly getting out of their seat, it's one thing to say like, stop getting out of your seat, and it's even better if you can say, hey, I need you to sit in your seat so that you can learn, or so that you can help the students around you pay attention to what's happening. And so being positive is so important, because you're setting that expectation for them, and instead of just kind of telling them what they're not supposed to be doing. So another thing, like the voice level, something that I used within the speech room is just going along with the expectations, telling them what you want them to do. And so I had a voice level chart that in certain scenarios, they had a certain level. So if it was a level 0, that would be they're quiet and they're not talking. And so we would dialogue and talk about, when is that appropriate? Maybe during a test or a quiz, maybe in the library, or maybe a level 1 voice is kind of a whisper, quiet voice. Maybe that's in the library, or maybe that is during reading time and you have to ask, the assistant teacher to use the restroom, whatever it might be. So you had voice levels and you're giving them expectations of what you want them to do. So if a student has clear expectations, it's a lot easier for them to pay attention, to follow along. Clear beginnings, clear endings for students with autism, that is really important. So if they know, hey, at the beginning of this, at least for me, for speech, at the beginning of this session, we're going to talk about exactly what we're going to do, and you know what the end goal is going to be. You know when you can check off that list of when we're going to be done, and it's time for you to go to the next thing. So they have a clear expectation of what is happening, and because sometimes students act out because they don't know what's going on. They feel maybe insecure or unsure of what's going on. And so they're going to show you some behaviors. They might be dysregulated. There might be something that's going on at home. They maybe didn't eat breakfast that day, or maybe they didn't sleep well, or maybe a family member is sick or passed away. There's so many different things behind the scenes that we have to be aware of. And obviously we're not going to be able to be aware of everything, but if we can kind of look at the whole student and say, usually their behavior isn't like this, and what has shifted, what has changed, let's try to figure it out. Let's try to meet them where they're at. And when they feel heard and when they feel valued and known, then that will be huge for them. Thank you.
I'll see you at the baby shower next week.
Okay.
Okay, bye, Mrs.
Bye.
Gonzales.
Bye.